There are a lot of questions about transparency that have been popping up throughout this entire electoral process. But I think the bigger question is, do these elections really even matter? And what we've seen since July 25th, 2021, when Said initiated his self-coup, he's been directly attacking the parliament, and he illegally and unconstitutionally acted to first prevent the democratically elected members of parliament from serving out their terms. And now he's been in charge of overhauling the entire role of the parliament. So the electoral law that governs these elections was not created in a transparent or a fair manner. It was produced undemocratically without the consultation of the Tunisian people. And what we've seen is that through the 2022 constitution that Said himself orchestrated, he's created an entire second house of parliament about which there is very, very little transparency. So I think, these elections have really been somewhat of a sham from the start. And that when all is said and done, I don't expect that either internal or outside observers will be able to say that these are free and fair elections.
Most opposition parties in Tunisia announced their boycott of the elections, accusing Said of establishing an individual rule in the new system of government approved in the 2022 constitution. So most candidates are independent figures without any political history or affiliation. What would that lead to?
Parliament had been growing more and more fractured since the 2011 revolution. But now, with potentially a parliament full of independents, we're likely going to see an even more fractured body that makes it very challenging for the members of parliament to agree on any sort of legislation or to address Tunisia's different political and economic challenges. But I think it's important that we remember that this is not a coincidence. This was done by design. Said has been clear about his disdain for parties, and the 2022 constitution took every measure to disempower parties and consolidate power in the hands of the presidency. So even if the opposition parties had chosen to run, they would have had very little ability to push back against Said. But now he's managed to actually achieve this, where you're having this incredibly fractured parliament where each individual has very little power.
Observers say the electoral constituencies abroad, in which thousands of Tunisians participated in 2019 legislative elections, did not receive any applications for candidacy, or only one candidate in the best cases ahead of the December elections. What's your take on Tunisians abroad reluctance to participate in these elections?
First of all, I think the really just onerous requirements of how to register one's candidacy made it very difficult for many, both in Tunisia and abroad, to declare their candidacy. For example, candidates were required to get 400 signatures of voters, and those people could not sign for any other candidate. So when you're talking about the districts abroad, the constituents are spread out in some cases across continents. This is really, really challenging for potential candidates. But second, I think what we've seen is less interest in politics amongst Tunisians writ large, particularly those who are living outside of the country. This is not affecting their day-to-day lives nearly the same way that it affects Tunisians that are in the country. And even amongst Tunisians living in Tunisia, the interest in politics has really dropped as we've seen the economy just get worse and worse. And people are far more concerned about their own ability to feed themselves and their families, their ability to find employment, less interested in politics. And then finally, I think the third reason that we've seen this is that the new electoral law changed the number of seats and the number of electoral districts. So there used to be 18 overseas constituencies, and there are now just 10. Which is confusing, and I think has confused some potential candidates and just added an additional barrier to those potential candidates who wanted to run in this election.